I want to talk about the Trump hush money trial that recently took place in New York. So, by a show of fingers, prior to showing you that ad, who heard the news that former President Trump was convicted of 34 felonies in May? Who had heard that news before tonight? All five of you. And by a show of fingers, who thinks former President Trump should serve jail time for those felonies? And if you think he should serve jail time? None of you do. Why not? Charles?
I guess none of them seem serious enough to be, thrown into federal prison.
Okay. Anybody else? What? 34 felonies, just playing devil's advocate here. Sounds pretty serious to me. You wouldn't give him any jail time? None of you would give him jail time.
Well, it didn't seem like real charges. I mean, it just seemed like something they were trying to, almost seemed like the jury was almost rigged. They were going to convict him, no matter what.
David, hang on a second. They had a jury of random people chosen. Both sides accepted the choice of the jury.
Yeah.
They heard all the evidence for weeks. They rendered this decision. They took time. They didn't do it in 15 minutes. They took, again, hours and hours. And they came down with this decision. Explain to me why you're not accepting it.
Well, I mean, a lot of the charges were, it seemed like to me like if somebody overvalues something, they give you a loan, you pay it back. How is that a crime? I mean, there were things in there that just didn't even seem like they were crimes. It was like coming up with made up charges. And so if people actually kind of went through and actually convicted him, I just don't get how that was a fair jury.
Okay. So wait a second. So the case you're talking about is the case having to do with overvaluing properties?
Well, wasn't that the New York trial?
Well, there were multiple trials, but I'm talking about the hush money trial where he paid Stormy Daniels $130,000. And there was the whole issue with Michael Cohen and the impact it had on the
well, I mean, he kind of showed that he lies about things anyway. There was also, I mean, in business and politics, I mean, if you probably couldn't throw a rock in Congress that somebody hasn't paid hush money to somebody, and where the money came from, and whether they did it legally or behind closed doors, or whether they're private money or with their the campaign money or what. It's kind of, I just think it's like they went for something for him that they thought they could convict him of more than an actual crime that's detrimental to anybody.
Okay. Now, how many of you, show of fingers, think this is what all politicians do, is just Trump was the one they decided to prosecute? Who's of that mindset? It's just common. Members of Congress do this, governors, senators, doesn't matter. Anybody else that this is just common behavior?
I would like to think not, but
well, I do. I mean, to me, it's like a non-disclosure, and I think that there's a lot of people paid off in government. So whether, I mean, it's a hush money, to that extent. So I do agree with David on that piece.
Okay. So when I asked one of you guys wouldn't toss him in jail, David explained why not. Kelly, why wouldn't you toss him in jail for this?
Again, I think it's more of just a non-disclosure agreement that's been blown out of proportion. I think that all of these presidents have shown to be womanizers, and all things have gone on behind the scenes that come out later. And this is just another example of something that I think is being used against him during this campaign. But I mean, I don't agree with it, but at the same time, I think it's blown way out of proportion. I do not believe he deserves jail time.
Okay. When I'm asking you folks about the hush money trial, how many of you, by a show of fingers, think that politicians generally speaking, are paying money to keep people quiet. That's just common practice in politics. Happens all the time. Trump just happened to get caught doing it. Ooh. Okay. By a show of fingers, who would say that as a direct result of this verdict against former President Trump, your decision of who to vote for in November has shifted at all? Has this moved any of you in any direction toward or away from Trump? Not at all. Zero movement. Hey, Charles, it moved you?
Yes.
How so?
I guess it just made me think that Trump is, a lot more uncouth than even I anticipated. So, yeah.
Okay. So before the verdict came down, you still entertained a possibility of voting for Trump?
Yes.
Okay. And now that the verdict has come down, that has shifted for you?
It's made me a little more just not as likely to vote for him, but it's not like something that, once I felt like they were piling it on and trying to, trump up these charges, so to speak, it became less of an issue, but it is something that I feel like if a person is willing to break the law in some capacity, that could be like a habitual thing. And, when you have a person in power, with that kind of mindset, a lot of dangerous things can happen.
Got it. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to answer, all of you, not just you, Charles, all five of you, very quick on these next questions. By a show of fingers, who agrees with former President Trump that his trial and conviction are examples of election interference? In other words, it's a case of Democrats putting Trump on trial during an election year. How many of you buy that argument? Two of you. Well, all five of you do. So all of you think this is election interference. By a show of fingers, who's concerned that if Trump is elected in November, he will go after the people who have been prosecuting him, and he will attempt to prosecute them? Who's concerned that there'll be, so three of you concerned that Trump will go after the people who've been prosecuting him? All right. By a show of fingers, who's familiar with a case being brought against former President Trump by Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney? Who's heard about that case? All five of you. Sherry, briefly, what do you know about that case?
Well, just that I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
Okay, so it's not clear as to why she's bringing the case. By a show of fingers, how many of you think you could very quickly explain to me why she's bringing this case? Ashley thinks he can. Okay. Ashley, why?
My understanding is that it's about the election and his interference in terms of making sure that he won the Georgia election or interfered somehow with the outcome and getting like as Georgia voted for Biden, that there was some things coming down from the Trump administration of election interference.
Got it. That sound familiar to the other four of you?
Yes.
Does?
Yes.
Okay, got it. By a show of fingers, who will be unhappy if this case does not come to trial before the November election? It's an election interference case in Georgia. Who will be unhappy if the case fails to come to trial before the November election? Just one of you, Charles. And by a show of fingers, who would say this Georgia case affects your thinking about who you plan to vote for in November? Any of you? None of you. I want to discuss the Trump hush money trial that recently took place in New York. By a show of fingers, Who heard the news that former President Trump was convicted of 34 felonies in late May? Who heard that news? All 5 of you have. And by a show of fingers, who thinks former President Trump should serve jail time for those felonies? 3 of you do. Janelle, why?
What makes him better than everyone else who've committed the same crimes and are put in prison for that, or even much less than what he's committed? I think he should serve time he's not entitled, even though he thinks he is.
Okay. Carrie, why?
I agree. It's the egregiousness of what he's been convicted of. It's the fact that they're felonies. It's the numerous amounts, and that he seems, undeterred to cease committing these acts. Also, that the fact that they're talking about his punishment could be something as simple as house arrest. Absolutely not. That's like bribery. So why wouldn't he have to go to prison like everybody else?
Okay. Got it. For the 2 of you who think he shouldn't go to jail, why not? Anthony, why not?
I don't think it would serve any purpose. I think a better punishment for him would be financial. Take his money, make him pay a $10 million fine. I just don't know what a week in jail is going to do other than create more polarization with everybody in the U.S.
Okay. Risa, why not?
For one, he's not going to go to the same prison as a normal citizen. He's going to go to one that's a little bit more upscale, where people of his ranking will be placed. And 2, if he gets locked up, lock all of them up, because all of them got the same charges. They're all dirty.
Okay, got it. By a show of fingers, who thinks this is just typical behavior by most politicians? There's nothing unique about what Trump did here. Who thinks this is just the way they are? 3 of you. Okay. By a show of fingers, who'd say that as a direct result of this verdict against former President Trump, your decision of who to vote for in November has shifted at all? Who'd say that this verdict against Trump shifted your opinion about who you're going to vote for, one way or the other? Anybody have their opinion shifted at all by this verdict? Nothing. So if it hadn't happened, you'd be thinking the exact same thing about Trump. Okay. By a show of fingers, who agrees with former President Trump that his trial and conviction are examples of election interference? In other words, that it's a case of Democrats putting Trump on trial during an election year. How many of you agree with Trump on that? Basically, they're targeting him. Democrats are targeting him in this election year. None of you think that's the case? Really? Okay. By a show of fingers, who's concerned that if Trump is elected in November, he will go after the people who've been prosecuting him, and he will attempt to prosecute them? All 5 of you concerned about that. Okay. By a show of fingers, who's familiar with a case being brought against former President Trump by Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney in Georgia? Who's familiar with that case? 3 of you are. Fadila, what do you know about that case?
It was in the news. It was about phone call that he made for the votes.
Okay. The votes
And
where?
now vote in Georgia, that he made phone call that he basically demanded, was it 20,000? I think it was 20,000 votes that needs to be just magically appear so he can go ahead and secure Georgia state, because it was turning on to Democrats, like you said, flip state. And then I also remember something in a halt with that lawsuit because of the personal relationship between the prosecutor and somebody. They had a romantic relationship.
Okay.
and then it wasn't spoken in the news much.
Okay, you didn't hear much news after you heard about the relationship.
No, no, not much.
Okay. So, Carissa and Anthony, was Fadila's description of what the original case was about, did she have it pretty much accurate, or do you have a different memory of what happened?
Oh, I
For me,
understand it.
that's basic.
Basically what happened? Okay.
Mhm.
Anthony?
Same thing, yeah. I mean, I know that they're trying to get it thrown out because the DA is having an affair with the prosecutor, and seems to kind of shifted to that.
Got it. By a show of fingers, who will be unhappy if this case, this Fani Willis case against Trump, does not come to trial before the November election? Who will be unhappy if this case does not go to trial before the November election? None of you. None of you are going to be unhappy if this case doesn't go to trial before the election. Why not?
I think it'll matter, no matter what happens.
It won't matter.
It's not like he's getting a jail time. 34 counts of felony didn't put him in jail. What is this gonna do to him? Nothing. Just give him a press.
Okay.
It won't change my life to know if he does or doesn't.
Okay. By a show of fingers, who would say this Georgia case affects your thinking about who you plan to vote for in November? Anybody? No. None.